If you walked past him in the cafeteria of the University of Chicago, you wouldn't even look twice. A tweed jacket, a faded leather briefcase, the smell of stale coffee and old books. To his students, he was just Professor John, a quiet, strictly academic man who taught Cold War history with a monotonous voice. But look closer. While the world was glued to the screens, watching tanks mobilize on the Russian border and fighter jets scrambling over the Baltic Sea, no one was looking at the shadows. No one noticed that the specific phrases used by the Russian president in his declaration of war were identical to the footnotes of a forgotten academic paper published 3 years ago by him. This is not the story of a soldier, a spy, or a politician. This is the story of the man who wrote the script for the global collapse we are living through today. And the terrifying part? He didn't do it for money. He did it to prove a theory. To understand John, we have to rewind to the winter crisis. The tension between Washington and Moscow was at a boiling point. Diplomatic channels were frozen. The Pentagon was desperate for a new strategy, something beyond sanctions and threats. They needed a psychological edge. Enter John. He wasn't invited to the Pentagon, he was summoned. His reputation in academic circles was peculiar. He was known for his zero-sum collapse theory. While other experts looked for de-escalation, John argued that peace was actually the disease. In his view, a controlled conflict was necessary to reset the global economic order. Witnesses say that during briefing meetings, while generals were shouting and slamming tables, John would sit in the corner, cleaning his glasses, completely detached. When he finally spoke, the room went silent. He didn't offer a peace treaty. He offered a mathematical formula for chaos. He proposed that by pushing Russia into a corner with very specific, calculated political insults, the US could force a reaction that looked like aggression, but was actually a desperate defense. He called it the forced hand. The implementation began on a Tuesday. Following John's blueprint, the State Department released a statement concerning the Baltic border regions. To the public, it sounded like standard diplomatic jargon. But to the Kremlin, it was an existential threat, exactly as John predicted. Within 48 hours, the first missiles were loaded. The stock markets crashed. Energy prices skyrocketed. Panic swept through Europe. But here lies the true horror of this story. While the world held its breath, expecting John to panic or try to reverse the damage, he did the opposite. A graduate student later leaked an email exchange from that week. When asked about the potential civilian casualties of his strategy, John's reply was 4 words long. Data requires a sample. He wasn't watching a war. He was watching a laboratory experiment. He treated nations like variables and human lives like acceptable margins of error. As the conflict escalated, sources suggest John was actually disappointed when tensions briefly cooled down. He needed the explosion. He needed the total collapse to validate his life's work. The climax wasn't on the battlefield. It happened in a secure room in Geneva during the last-ditch peace talks. John was there, officially as an advisor. According to leaked transcripts, a ceasefire was on the table. Both sides were ready to sign. The pens were literally in their hands. Then, John passed a single note to the American Secretary of State. We still don't know exactly what was written on that paper. But 3 minutes later, the US delegation stood up and walked out. The talks collapsed. The war expanded. Why? Some theories suggest John was never working for American interests at all. Was he a Russian asset playing the long game? Or perhaps something even darker? a man loyal to no flag, an accelerationist who believed that Western civilization needed to be destroyed to be reborn. By the time the first major cities were evacuating, John had already cleared his office. His computer was wiped. His apartment in DC was empty. Today, the history books, the ones that are still being written, call this era the Great Fracture. Analysts argue about geopolitics, resources, and borders. They look for complex reasons for the devastation. But they are looking in the wrong places. Sometimes, history isn't shaped by armies or presidents. Sometimes, it's shaped by a quiet man in a tweed jacket, sitting in a dim room, deciding that the world is too stable for his liking. John is still out there. And if you listen closely to the news tonight, to the rhetoric rising in new corners of the globe, you might just hear his voice again.